In this lesson, we'll be going over the verb gustar. Now, one thing about gustar is it is an extremely commonly used verb in Spanish, and because of that, it's very important to understand how it works. However, it functions a little bit differently than it does in English. So first, let's talk about the translation of it. We say that it basically means to like. So for example, if I were to say me gusta, that would mean I like. But the thing is, it works a little bit differently than a normal verb. Because what we'd expect it to do, right, is we'd say yo, and then we got the word gustar, take off the AR, go to the yo form, the I form, yo gusto, I like. But that's not exactly how it works. We say me gusta. And so why do we say me gusta? Well, that's because of what the actual translation is. And so it's very important to understand the difference between a translation and a literal translation. A translation is basically the equivalent of a statement or a word from one language to another. So for example, gustar means to like. But the literal translation is literally the sentiment of the word, exactly what we're talking about. And so the literal translation of gustar is to please. We can also say to be pleasing to. And so that's why it works a little bit differently. Because it's not necessarily to like, but we're more talking about something pleasing me. And so in order to use the verb gustar, we're going to have to use these down here, which are known as indirect object pronouns. Essentially what these do is these demonstrate the recipient of an action. In this case, the recipient of the pleasure, right? So for example, if I were to say, I like the car. I like the car. Well, basically, what we have to do now is we have to think about what the literal translation, what they would literally say in Spanish. They wouldn't literally say, I like the car. They would literally say, the car is pleasing to me. Or to me, pleases the car. And so essentially what we're going to do now is first, we always start with the indirect object pronoun in Spanish. This is the most direct translation. To me pleases the car. So we want to say to me, which means me. Now we have the word gustar, to please, right? And so in this case, we want to think about what's doing the pleasing. When we talk about I like the car, well, it's not necessarily the action of me liking it, it's more the action of the car pleasing me. And so because of that, it's going to be in the it form, or the el form, if we're talking about the car. So me gusta el carro, or coche. And so in this case, you can see that it's functioning very differently than a normal verb. But overall, if you kind of just think about it logically and think about the literal translation of what's trying to be said, you can usually pick out how to use the word gustar. So let's look at another example. If I were to say, we like the cakes. We like the cakes. So the order that it always goes in is first going to be your indirect object pronoun. It's kind of weird, but they always start with like to me, to you. This is in any case as well, not just with gustar, with other words. So for example, if I were to say I give you, they'd say to you I give. And so it's very interesting because, the word order doesn't actually matter too much when we're looking at languages. Each language is going to have its own word order, and in that language it's going to make sense. And so in Spanish, it just makes sense that these come at the beginning. So if we're saying we like the cakes, I want to first start with our indirect object pronoun. And so let's think about it literally. What are we trying to say? The cakes are pleasing to us. So we have to say is to us first, which is going to be nos. Next, we're going to take the word gustar, and we have to think about, okay, what is doing the pleasing here? In this case, the cakes. So it's going to be gustan los pasteles. Next, going to be a form of the, and then finally, talking about the cakes. Could be pasteles, could be tortas. Tortas can also mean pie. It kind of just depends on what kind of cake you're talking about. But overall, you can see that we have to very much think about the word gustar because we're using an indirect object pronoun, and also the word gustar is corresponding to what is quote-unquote doing the pleasing. And because of that, a lot of the times when we're talking about objects, or we're talking about liking something, it's going to be an object. And because of that, the two most common forms you're going to see are gusta and gustan. So you've probably learned from your teachers that these are the only two forms that you can use. A lot of Spanish 1 or Spanish 2 teachers tend to teach this, But I'm here to say it's simply not true. You can actually use any form of gustar. You can say gusto, gustas, gusta, gustamos, or gustan. But the only thing is that we have to think about it a little bit differently than in English. So for example, if I were to say te gusto would literally mean to you I am pleasing, or you like me. And so I just wanted to point out the fact that we can use gustar with any form. It doesn't just have to be with gustar or gustan. The most common, though, are definitely going to be these two. And another thing to note about this is that typically when they say it like this, te gusto, you like me, it typically tends to be in a romantic sense. So if I'm saying te gusto, it's going to probably mean you like me in the sense of, romantically. If you want to say you like me in terms of, just straight up liking me, like getting along well with me, we'd have to say te llevas bien conmigo. Something along those lines. A couple different ways to say it, but that'll probably be the most common. And so overall, you can see that the verb gustar is going to function a little bit differently in Spanish than in English. And because of that, we always have to be thinking, okay, what is receiving the pleasure and what's giving the pleasure in cases of liking.